just to say, this meeting is going to be recorded. Don't worry, you won't be on the recording if you don't say anything. So that shouldn't make you self-conscious. The first 45 minutes will be recorded, and then there will be an open space for people to speak and to connect with each other. And we will have looked at what's you might have put in the chat if you want to put questions and so forth, or ideas, comments in the chat. We'll begin to an open conversation. But just big welcome to everybody who's here and who's joining to Unrehearsed Futures Season 5. The title of this season is Theater in the Active, New Directions, and the inspiration of this curatorial collaboration between Drama School Mumbai, Jehan Manekshaw, the University of Cape Town, South Africa, a School of Theater and Dance, Embodied Poetics, and Limbic Theater, both in the UK. The inspiration was to really invite new curators who are at the heart of collaborative rallying points. So projects that would benefit from an online, international, virtual kind of rallying point. So this has been the inspiration of this particular season, our 5th season. And so in that spirit, I invited Mark Evans and his wonderful colleagues, Denise, Kenney, and Michael Pearce, to speak to us about their Lecoq network project. So this 5th session is entitled Out of the Black Box, the Social and Environmental Practices of the Lecoq Diaspora. So I will soon hand it over to Mark so that he can launch into this topic. But I wanted to say that because this is a networking event, we wanted to invite everyone to, if you would like to, put a short bio in the chat with your contact information. And then Falguni at Drama School Mumbai will save the chat and she will send it to all the participants. So that might be useful to you to have a sort of, I don't know, database of people who've joined. And then the second thing is that Falguni will post the Facebook page that has been created by Mark for the Lecoq Network, and it is a private web page, so you can join it if you'd like to. So both of those things, inviting you to put your bios and contact information in the chat, anything about yourself you'd like us to know. And with that, without further ado, I will hand the session over to Mark Evans.
Hi, lovely to meet everybody here. Just a few words, first of all, about how this project that Denise and Michael and I are working on came together. It kind of, I suppose, along with many interesting projects, it kind of, for me, first emerged out of lockdown. So in the middle of lockdown, my year group at the Lecoq School decided to do a Zoom Connect, and we all got together and connected. And in the middle of all of that, about 40 or 50 people all meeting online, I met Neil Kadja again, who was on my first year. And he happened to be working at the University of British Columbia with Denise. And he was just at the point of retiring, but he put Denise and I in contact. So we started a meeting, started talking about whether there was something we might want to do together. University of British Columbia has a connection with University of Exeter in the UK. And so as part of the discussions we had, we drew in Michael from University of Exeter. And then I remember, I think it was one summer, somehow, all three of us managed to meet together in the Wellcome Institute in London. And again, the ideas started to emerge from our discussions about the kind of what we felt was missing in terms of scholarship and research around Lecoq. And the heart of that really was the feeling amongst, I think, the three of us, that aside from the ways in which we all applied the training we had at Lecoq School, the Lecoq-based training we'd benefited from within our work of making theatre, that it also had so many other benefits and could be applied in all sorts of other contexts. And we had a sort of vague feeling that there was some value here, that there was something of interest here. So that's our starting point. For me personally, that came out of, as well, out of work I'd done on the Routledge Companion to Jacques Lecoq, which was a large 50-chaptered book that drew on a whole load of aspects of Lecoq's practice, including the ways in which it had sort of found its way into the work of people working in social contexts. And I know I've seen a few names crop up of people who contributed to that book. So they might talk a little bit more about that later on. And also more recently in 2022, I found myself directing a play that dealt with mental health, but it also dealt with environmental crises. And the play attempted to put together someone suffering from mental health and a polar bear. And that the two actors playing those two characters and bring them together and in an interesting, provocative way to explore what kind of dialogue they might have. Which I found I was drawing enormously on all sorts of aspects of my own Lecoq training. So those were the two fundamental things for me. And in the middle of all of that, I think I found myself thinking about how could we apply Lecoq-based practice in social and ecological contexts. And our project kind of now, we've been working on it for over a year, I think now, looking for different sources of funding, developing it further and further, seeing how we can enable connections between that kind of practice, how we can examine the implications of such work for other disciplines. So I think I might already have said enough. I think we'll probably fill out more as Denise and Michael talk about how they came to the project and what their interests in the project are. And I'm delighted that we're also joined by a couple of potential partners in the project, Sarah Harper from Frisch Theatre Urbane and Ellie Nixon, who's representing La Mancha, which is a Lecoq-based organization based in Chile. So I'm going to pass over to Denise now, and I think she might want to talk a bit more about possibly some of the ecological, environmental elements that we're seeking to explore through the project.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you. I'm just so thrilled to be here and to be meeting people. Yeah, I live in the Okanagan Valley, which is the interior of British Columbia in the unceded ancestral territories of the Syilx people. And as Michael said, I'm at University of British Columbia. And in addition to performance and digital media courses, I also teach a course for our new Bachelor of Sustainability on creative engagement strategies. So I'm teaching to students who are not theater people, but they could be in biology, management, statistics, all those kinds of things. So that's been really interesting. And when I moved here, I had to really begin looking for ways of engaging my community outside of the sort of sanctioned cultural spaces because they weren't very prevalent here. And I also started collaborating with colleagues who were poets, visual artists, computational artists, because theater artists were also pretty thin on the ground here. That I'd done a lot of applied performance work in the past, but when I arrived here, that's when I really began thinking a lot about using the Lecoq engagement strategies outside of the sort of traditional space and out into the world. And over the years, I've sort of beginning to think of myself as a kind of social acupuncturist of sorts. And I'm really interested in cognitive frames, which we're seeing right now with the election in the States being quite locked, and our habits and our belief systems and how our art and practice maybe vibrates between them and maybe erodes them, dismantles them. I'm also really interested in health and well-being and the hows of what I do. And I guess that's where the Lecoq training comes in, because I'd say that even though a lot of what I do might not resemble the work done in the theater, it really underpins everything I do. And I kind of think of my training as a way of being in the world, a way of co-creating with the world, and privileging the body and the body-mind in that. So I put links to sites that will that show some of the many projects in the comments, but over the years, I've done stuff on campus, in parks, theaters, schools, ghost towns, neighborhoods, wineries, front yards, galleries, construction sites, rivers, you name it. So we've been trying out a lot of stuff. And so I just wanted, what I thought would be interesting is just to share some of the things I'm pondering now in relationship to this project that Mark, Michael, and I are working on. And I think given some of the conversations I've had with colleagues, I think many of us are pondering these things. And probably the biggest one in relationship to the work is time. I'm like, so these are things that I'm asking in relationship to now. So what now? Like if we're making work and training people now, what are our challenges and our opportunities? And time seems to be one of the biggest challenges. Like if I look back over our many projects, the ones that seem to be the most successful were the ones that happened over very long timelines. And that's really difficult to do. And a university setting, I just barely get the students to be present, and then it's over. And also as a Lecoq person, I sometimes start to feel like a bit of a novelty act in workshop settings. And I've been asking myself how to make those engagements a little bit more meaningful. And some of the immersive stuff, sorry. No, I'm fine, thanks. Sorry, that's my husband. Some of the immersive stuff can sometimes feel to me a little bit like a, I don't know, get lost in the noise of all the other experiential opportunities for sale in the world. So we asked a lot of questions. I had a project called the eCard Incubator, and after we did a lot of immersive stuff, we started asking questions about that. The good news is I'm really finding people needing to belong, needing to be needed, wanting to belong. So I'm kind of leaning into that, but it's weird. I did a workshop in San Francisco a number of years ago, and it was a very young practitioners, and not a single one characterized home as a geographical place when we asked them about home. And I found that really interesting. They seem to me to be in a kind of root shock, and using online communities, but all communicated a kind of a lack. So I kind of find that encouraging, because I feel like people are moving more toward that. And so that's sort of an ancillary aspect of the Lecoq work, this literally bringing bodies together in space. Yeah, and the other challenge I find now, but it's also an opportunity, I think it's where we're uniquely positioned to address social and ecological issues, is the idea of embodied learning and embodied experiences, which is hard now. At my university, the more students they can get into a lecture hall with clickers and multiple choice, the happier they are. So it's a fight. And also the opportunity to connect people with the other than human world people are thirsty for it. So that's something that now I find is really resonating with the work specifically having to do with Lecoq. And lastly is I've noticed I'm thinking a little bit more about the importance of imagination, and I've noticed over the last 15 years or so a kind of it's getting harder. There seems to be a bit of a diminishment of the imaginative realm with my students. I don't know about audiences yet. I don't think that's actually the case, depending on the engagement. But those are the things I'm pondering about, and my instinct tells me that the Lecoq pedagogy and the way of being in the world is really well positioned to address some of these contemporary challenges, but not necessarily in a way that we would all immediately recognize. Yeah. But I have this bedrock understanding that regardless of whether what I'm doing is identifiably sort of a Lecoq thing, it is very much born of that training. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is some of those applications that don't look so obviously Lecoq, but definitely are. And I know that there are a lot of companies and people out there doing similar work. So that's me.
Thanks, Denise. So I'm Michael. Lovely to meet you all. As well as an academic, I'm a theatre practitioner. So my background, I actually grew up in Zimbabwe, and then I studied initially physical theatre at Rhodes, and then I went on to study at the Lecoq School in Paris. And now I'm lecturing at the University of Exeter. And I'm particularly interested in how theatre can support eco-consciousness and pro-environmentalism, especially in relation to issues of inclusivity and equality of access. And there was this article by Carl Lavery where he was sort of asking, you know, what can theatre do? Isn't theatre the most sort of human-centric of all art forms? Because does theatre exist without the human at its center? And I was really interested in that. And I was interested in, yeah, just the question, you know, what, as a theatre maker and a studier, like how can I contribute to this crisis that, you know, that it seems to be increasingly is increasingly alarming. And so I had to go back to the drawing board because my background was really in race and anti-racism. And I had to do a lot of research looking into, you know, environmentalism and what people are thinking. And some of the key ideas that really struck me in the literature was this advocacy for a shift in worldview away from an anthropocentric to an ecocentric perspective. And how, you know, numerous scholars were identifying anthropocentrism as a dominant driver of climate change and biodiversity loss, specifically the belief in human exceptionalism, you know, that only we as humans have intrinsic value, and that kind of justifies the way that we extract and exploit the more than human world. And in turn, this sort of worldviews like feeds the sense of our estrangement and our disconnection from the non-human world, which is only increasing now in this digital, as you know, with digital technological advancements. So very inspired by scholars like David Abram and Don Haraway, who advocate really for a reconnection, you know, for us to acknowledge, understand, and principally feel our entanglement with the world, which is not just going into nature, like on a safari or having a walk. I mean, that too, absolutely. But even more so, a sort of fundamental shift in how we perceive our relationship with the more than human world, how we perceive it as interconnected and codependent. And what really struck me reading a lot of these sort of ecological sort of philosophical texts was just the emphasis on embodiment and how they were talking about not only the need to reconnect, but how, in such a sensorial way. And then it sort of fell into place, and I was like, oh, I know what theatre can do. I know what I can do, and I know the background that I have, because going to the Lecoq School, certainly, I mean, when in my undergraduate degree, you know, the conversations were all about the body-mind binary and the dualisms, and physical theatre was kind of undermining those assumptions. But it also struck me about my Lecoq training was how much it was also challenging kind of human and nature binaries as well. In the various exercises which you're encouraged to do to, you know, observe the more than human world, to embody the more than human world, you know, it demands a kind of empathy and I mean in an embodied way, not necessarily an emotional way. So I started this experimental module called Eco Theatre Outdoor and Immersive Performance, It's with my students. It's very experimental. They are really amazing. You know, they've totally come on board with just conducting this experiment with me as we look. I don't have any answers, but as we look for ways that theatre can, you know, begin to decenter the human and make us and help us think about these entanglements. And I draw on, it's not a Lecoq module, but I draw on a lot of Lecoq exercises that have been really useful. And I write about that in a journal article that I've just published. So if you're interested, you can read more about that there. So I won't go into too much detail now, but yeah, so the project, just looping back to connecting. So, you know, I'm really coming at it from the angle of, yeah, wondering how the Lecoq pedagogy is, like I am doing, and I'm aware others are doing, how people are taking it and adapting it to respond to environmental and social, because that's also a weird binary that is, you know, obviously doesn't exist either. They're totally intertwined, but these environmental social challenges we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So the two kind of aspects to the project, as you've heard from all of us, I think our interest in how our training in Lecoq-based approaches has then drawn us towards, or enabled us to move towards, exploring these kind of entanglements with nature that we feel there's an opportunity to explore in more depth and detail. And also, we were very much conscious of the lack of a kind of a network of practitioners from the Lecoq School and from other Lecoq-based pedagogies, whereby we could begin to have those kinds of dialogues and share practice and share ideas and talk. I suppose largely, I mean, I'm very aware of the network of contemporaries that I have from the school, but far less aware of the work of other students who have come largely after me, very few before, over time. So part of the project we see as an opportunity to enable some of that networking and discussion, and where relevant, to actually try and share practice amongst those people who are engaging in this work. And to that end, we've sought out and so far identified a few partner organizations that we've been looking to develop the project with. And I'd just like to offer an opportunity for the two people representing some of those partners here to just say a few words about their company's work and what they see as potentially as possibly the value of a project like this. So Ellie, perhaps you'd like to go first, and then Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Mark. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. It's lovely to meet you all and to hear how the kind of project leaders are moving forward with what I think is a crucial project. There are so many resonances, I feel. So I graduated in 1989, and with my partner, Rodrigo Malbran, we formed a company, toured Scandinavia, Central America and Central Europe, and then ended up in Chile. Chile was was in a transition phase between dictatorship and democracy, and Rodrigo was returning after many years of exile. Before the dictatorship, there was a very rich theatrical culture in Chile, and then through dictatorship, theatre had no voice, but it did have an underground voice of protest. When we arrived, we were kind of fresh out of the school. Rodrigo had got his kind of pedagogical, he was a pedagogical year with Lecoq, and we decided to set up the school. And we discovered a massive tension between trying to stay true to what we'd learned and imagining that this culture would just buy into it straight away. And bit by bit, as we discussed this with each other, we realized that our experiences of going through the school had been different. And we were really realized that we had to listen to the students, and the students, little by little, were co-creators of an evolving pedagogy. I think that's one of the big key essences of the Lecoq pedagogy, that it's always evolving, adapting, but you have to listen. And in the beginning, there was a real sense of a kind of social injustice, and we would address that. Graduates went and worked in the prison system, worked in hospitals, well-being, welfare, therapy. There was a real sense of kind of social justice and support for each other. And then increasingly, as we realized that Chile had an incredible wealth of rich natural resources, which were just indiscriminately being extracted and forcing indigenous peoples out of their homelands, their spaces, that somehow could we address that? Our school was is in the Andean mountain range, and we realized that there was a kind of relationship between Lecoq's adaptable pedagogy, our embodied cognition, and our environing world. And that kind of triumvirate got us really, really excited. And the students have changed. The students' needs, their desires have changed. So we're really getting engaged with that kind of environmental sustainability. People who are living in volatile environments. We constantly have earthquakes and earth tremors, but there are all sorts of different kinds of volatility. So our company, our teaching has used this kind of post-human approach that Mike's talking about, which I find really exciting in your work, Mike, to kind of read, listen, and adapt and open up to what's happening in the world right now. I think in that sense, we couldn't cloister ourselves away, but it's just allowed us to branch and grow. And on that, after about 25 years of relentless practice and trying to get grants for performances and international touring, I did my PhD at Exeter University, and I've now written a book called Imagining Bodies and Performer Training, which was everything that Mike refers to, that sense of the more than human, and giving examples of that. And there are people here who have been interviewed for the book as well. And I'd also like to announce a conference, an AHRA conference being held at my current institution, Norwich University of the Arts, which is titled Body Matters. It's under the kind of umbrella of architecture, but there's so much work going on in contemporary architectural practices, which touches on the body. I've talked far too much, but thank you for giving me the space, and I hope we can continue to develop the project.
Lovely. Thank you, Ellie. Sarah, do you want to say a few words about your work now?
Sure. Yeah. So my company, the company that I work with, is called Friche Théâtre Urbain. We're based in Montreuil, in Paris suburbs. And so my parcours is a little bit similar to Ellie in that when I left Lecoq's, I started to work with Pascal Laurent, who'd also been at Lecoq, and he was involved in street theatre. And that was kind of like a palette that I hadn't known, working in much more classical performance in the UK beforehand. And so the first 15 years of our work together with other people from Lecoq, but also people who were much more street oriented, were sort of very large scale, strong brush strokes of big, quite violent promenade performances that toured to festivals all over the world, using acrobatics, stilts, object manipulation, flags, very popular form of theatre. And after about 15 years, we sort of changed radically. And so for the last 15 years, we've been working on a very intimate scale, still in public space. And the work that we do now is socially engaged, in that we are employed usually by town councils to address social issues by working with people who are not theatre people, not in theatre spaces. We usually work on street corners or on inner city wastelands. We are invited to find an approach sensible to a social problem. That might be street violence, it might be intergang violence, it might be women getting mugged going across a wasteland for their phones. It might be just simple social disaffection for an area, for a suburb. So I work mostly in the northern suburbs of Paris, which are very excluded socially and financially, and very heavily multicultural. And I work with all ages of a population on very long-term projects, or quite long-term projects. I mean, a project might last for 2 years. So that echoes quite a lot about the kinds of things that Denise was talking about in terms of longevity is super important, because the work that I do basically is based on meeting people and talking to people and listening to people. And only when I've done that for several weeks or months do I propose or pick up on an art form or an occupation that might have been suggested by someone else. So my work is 100% responsive, I would say, but I have to bring a lot of baggage with me. So I have to bring all the different types of theatre that I've worked on and all the different types of forms or exercises or ways of responding to a social situation. So thinking about this project, which I do find extremely interesting and nourishing, I think, for us at this stage in our careers, where training is a long way away, actually. And so it was quite surprising to me to think, oh God, what exercises do I use from Lecoq? Well, of course, I use a lot of exercises from Lecoq, from my training. But I think that what's more important than which exercises I use is words like, I start with observation. I just start by walking around and looking at a quartier, at a neighborhood, for days, for weeks. Sometimes I use a tool to enable me to not look too weird, like I draw, or I note, or I record sound. But basically, this observation is to work with what I see rather than what I think I will see, or what the municipality who has employed me has told me I will see. Because quite often the social crisis or problem that I've been invited to in some way solve or respond to is actually not the problem. So I usually find another enjeu when we have watched and listened and talked to people. So in another way, another thing that I would draw back to Lecoq is this sense of every time I do a project, it's an inquiry. I'm doing an enquête. And I'm arriving with a blank page. And that's so, so important and very difficult to defend in funding terms. You know, I tend to do a better project when it's a follow-on project, because they go, oh, it's okay. We know you don't know what you're going to do and you won't tell us. So just we're going to put something down on paper and we know it might be different. So I may say we will do a piece of theatre. But if theatre is too provocative, it might be that actually we have a public meeting, or I make a snack van to respond to a problem, because making a piece of theatre together is impossible when what people need is spaces to meet. So a gardening project might come out of a memory project addressing a wasteland space, but actually it's more important to the recently arrived immigrants who I'm working with to be able to plant food to eat. And I'm not suggesting that what we do nourishes those families, but it's a performance of community in a way. And I think the other thing that I've drawn through, just to go back to the Lecoq basis of the project, is this reading of a public space. So reading of space, looking at space and trying to understand the dynamics of space. And so to apply that to the work I do now, I'm trying to understand the dynamics of the quartier that I've been invited to work in. So, for example, at the moment, the project that I'm working on is very far removed from theatre, but it's a diagnostic sensible of a quartier. So I've been invited by the directors of culture, of urbanism, of housing, of ecological transition, and even of commerce to find out what the people in a quartier think about their quartier. Now, maybe there might be a little bit of theatre, but in fact, the only theatre I will probably use is verbatim theatre as a way of presenting to town councillors very difficult témoignage that they don't want to listen to, or that people wouldn't want to be identified as having said. So it might be mapping or making sound recordings, because basically, and I think this is also goes back to Lecoq, it's working. What we did in Lecoq was we worked with people from day one with a blank slate, with people whose cultural codes and ideas of what theatre might be, we did not know, we did not necessarily understand or appreciate, and we didn't share. And so I sometimes am making theatre with a community where they'll say, well, you decide, Sarah, what we do because you're the director. And I go, but I don't have an idea of what we should do. And so little by little, I leave the space for other people to go, oh, well, I know then if you don't know. And people will come into an empty space, or a space in which, a space which is not filled by an inspirational artist. So I don't come with inspiration. I just come with bags of tools, and I kind of facilitate in public space like that. And I think maybe that's enough. Maybe I've said enough.
Yeah, I think, because I'm aware that we're nearly at the end of the sort of 45 minutes of focused chat. So I wonder if maybe we sort of now might be a good time to throw things open a little more. I think what's particularly interesting coming out of this is, what is it specifically about Lecoq training as opposed to other training that has opened us up to considering these sort of projects and this kind of work? Is there something inherent about Lecoq training that speaks to the kinds of themes that we've been hearing people talk about? It's something's drawn us together, something's spoken to us about this kind of work and these kind of problems. And I'd be very interested to hear if other people have any reflections on what they see the connections as being. Or is that too big a question?
Hi,
Well,
I'm Claire. Oh, sorry, Denise, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Claire.
Well, I think it has something to do with what Michael spoke to about the emphasis on beyond the human and the connection to the natural. I'm teaching elements of Lecoq right now, and we spend so much time in the natural world in our imaginations, and being things that are not human. So I think it's that natural connection to that for me helps me connect it to the ecological world and environmental world.
We recently had a discussion, Denise and I recently had a discussion with Joyce Henderson, who's a UK-based ex-Lecoq practitioner, who'd done a workshop for Complicité about working with and around sort of nature. And she found that when she was doing the work that she was sort of doing neutral mask work, basically, in the terms that you've described, sort of associating and embodying the natural environment. And she said part of the difficulty is moving beyond that. So you get in a really nice space where you feel, you experience a kind of connection with the world around you. But then the step to making theatre, or making something that it then expresses and shares, that's where she found the point of difficulty.
Well,
So,
I was thinking, Mark, in response to your question, drawing on what Sarah was saying, there's a question around what constitutes theater. I mean, dialogical work, site-specific work, all that kind of stuff might not be what we traditionally would consider to be theater, but is more and more in the contemporary performance landscape becoming theater or performance, I suppose, is better. And so it's this idea of being available to, responding to, open to the world, that kind of curiosity and observation is probably one of the primary connectors prior to the output, regardless of the output. And the output can look a number of different ways, right? So the workshop could be positioned as theater of sorts as well. So it's I was just returning to what Sarah said about the And also with Ellie in terms of being responsive to the world, and that's why I mentioned working with other artists, visual artists, the community, different communities is inherent in that is you can't rely on working with just people who all know your language. You have to really be responsive to the context and to the languages of others. So yeah.
I wanted to.
Sorry.
No, go.
Oh, no, Camille, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking, one of the things I remember finding really fascinating, I was doing therapy at the time in my first year with doing Lecoq. I always found it very sci-fi, like I always found like it was a great experience. And I knew it was going to be exactly what I thought it was going to be, right? I thumbed through the moving body, but I kind of knew it was going to be this exploration of everything that could possibly be. And that was the thing that going through, a dramatic writing school or whatever, you never really took advantage of the fact that this is just this open space, right? As my friend says, all the world's a stage, right? You have an opportunity to perform at your best at every moment. And here you are getting this experience that's so very different from being objects to colors, to be able to explore this larger kind of, panoramic thing is what I felt like. And part of it was me just always recognizing, because I was a shy guy and I was very sensitive to contact and communication, is that you always have an opportunity to inspire someone. And that's what my friend meant by all the world's a stage, right? I was frustrated with some job situation. Everybody's a little bit more immature than where I was previously. And he said, hey, man, you have an ability to be able to raise these people up, not like some sort of hero, but just in practice. You can engage in a way that they're not. You can raise the level of expectation around how you're supposed to be spoken to and how you expect to speak to other people. And that can raise everybody up. And so in my case, having done theater for so many years or been involved in it, this was such an intimate moment of just practice, because I'm working with a contact with the public all the time in libraries. And it's so much more, nobody's even thinking about art. But if you can inspire somebody, that's what art is, right? You're just inspiring them to see something that you saw that got you to doing something goofy and crazy. And then you're hoping that goofy and craziness will inspire somebody else. So it's a constant contact. It's not really as you over here and I'm over there. That's what the thing that I felt like was lost in Lecoq sometimes, is that we don't have a constant engagement with the audience unless you're busking every day. Unless you're going right outside and doing something with the audience, you're not learning anything. You're learning it for this small little lab, but if you're testing it out every week as opposed to every day or every hour you're not necessarily getting the experience of theater you might be able to get, And we all kind of out of more shyer experience, especially as we use academics or any other place that's a shelter for us as artists. But, our biggest difficulty and our biggest complexity is our engagement with people. And on an everyday basis, that can become really annoying. There's a lot of potential for friction, but there's also a lot of potential for growth if we always think about that world's a stage thing. Anyway, that's what made me think about when you guys were talking, because I just think the audience is very key to this, but we never really engage. There's such a thing called audience, blah, 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 theater or whatever, but it just always seemed key to me. Like every time I would go on stage, it was just the experience of being out in front of a lot of people who are watching me very passively, but letting me know whether I'm registering with them at every moment and whether we're working together as a group or not. And so that was something that was fundamental about me learning, trying to get more out of this experience and going to Lecoq finally. Anyway, I'll say that and then let you guys talk.
Yeah, no, I that resonates a lot. We all learned an awful lot from Lecoq and from the teachers at Lecoq School, but I also recognize what we learned from each other as students at the school, and the school encouraged that sort of learning from each other as well. And after you leave, after you're no longer with the teachers, that's part of the legacy, is how you learn to learn from each other and learn from, as Sarah, I think, put it so well, how you learn from the people that you're working with, and that you go into the work with that level of engagement and observation, and I suppose even humility in a sense as well. I think it's just approaching the time where normally we'd finish off recording. So if everybody's happy, unless anybody wants to say anything else to be captured for posterity, we might move now to a sort of more informal chat where people can say whatever they like, and no one will have any record of it. Johan, did you want to just?
I had a question for Denise, actually. But Margarita wanted to say something as well earlier. She was after Camille, so.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I wanted to, something Denise said, and I find myself teaching history of theater and intro to theater this year, in addition to a more practical course. And I'm so used to teaching the practical courses, and it's kind of a no-brainer how you engage the body, the space. And I, like, this whole time, I'm like, what, Denise, something you said about the clickers. The students walk in the room prepared to be bored. The students walk in the room prepared to be droned at for, you know, the hour, and they just have to endure it. And I have been busting my ass trying to do I decided to approach it, how can I teach history in an embodied way? So I've been trying so hard. I warm them up every day, even for history class. Just peeling them off the seats has been a struggle. But for example, yesterday I took them to play a gamelan. Hamilton College is blessed to have a full gamelan orchestra instruments. So I was like, okay, history of theater, here you go, playing the gamelan. And part of the idea was that every object in Indonesian culture has a anima, has a soul. So which also connects me to this connection to the world around us, and not being human-centric, but like seeing the spirit in everything around us. So I've been struggling, I think we need to go beyond theater, because students are so in their heads nowadays. They are walking heads. They literally don't have a body. And it's getting them into their body has been such a struggle. So this is what I wanted to share with you guys, the perspective of how do we teach not practical courses in an embodied way. That's my challenge for myself and for the field.
Yeah, Margarita, you have the email you'll have my email, and I would love to continue that conversation about, because that's sort of paratheatrical in a way. I mean, everything, again, what constitutes performance.
I've already copied your email because I was like, yes, I want to talk about this.
Marguerite, you're not talking about shyness, though, are you? You're talking about something else.
No, not shyness. They're disconnected from their body experience. Academia means they're in their heads. So they're just floating, bored, just only engaging their brains in a very bored way. So that's what I'm talking about. No, not shyness. It's not shyness. It's something completely different, disconnection. And sorry, I did. Jehan, is that how you say your name? I didn't mean to.
Yeah. No. Denise, I was just a question that occurred to me when you were first speaking was, you spoke about how, I'm going to paraphrase very loosely, but we have, and I don't say this, I know this is a whole room of Lecoq practitioners. I am not a Lecoq practitioner. But everything that you spoke of, I just replaced the word with theater practice, and it still made sense. And I was telling Amy on a side chat, is I don't know why we have to label the Lecoq experience. I feel like it is a distillation of practice. I was trying to say to her that I feel like what Lecoq seems to have done, from my point of view as an outsider listening for many years now to this world, is that it's been a space in which the distillation of the idea of what theater practice per se can do for community and for society exists. And so it just reaffirms my thoughts that the practice of rehearsal, the practice of holding space, the practice of bodies in space, etc., they all work for social good. But here was my question: is we seem to have, and I talked about theater practitioners in general, we seem to have put ourselves in a place where there is an othering of ourselves with the rest of the world. And you had mentioned, Denise, earlier that we have so much to offer, but we have to find ways of I don't know, presenting ourselves to the world or interacting with it or with other people to see where they can find application of what we have to offer, possibly in their worlds. Am I making sense so far? And there seems to be a lost in translation moment between people who don't do theater and people who do theater as to what theater has to offer. So my question is, what do you think we need to internally rewire amongst ourselves in order to make it easier to be more, to make those connections across this strange divide? Sorry, Amy, you want to help me translate that question? I really feel like I rambled a bit.
Well, yeah, I kind of have repositioned the position of the artist is every conversation you have, whether you're talking to funders, right? Whether you're raising money, whether you're having conversations with colleagues or the government or whatever, I'm now arriving at that all being my artistic practice. The way we walk through the world is the steps we take, because in the environmental area, you can get really burnt out, and certainly with some of the social practice and stuff. And so there's a kind of a compass, I think, required that you lean into each step you take and reposition, because otherwise it can get really demoralizing in a way. You know, and I think we're not just like I've also trained in, you know, traditional theater. I've also trained in dance and site-specific stuff and community. I've filmed my graduate works in film. So, you know, we're it's like a recipe. We're combining lots of different things in our work. I would say, having trained in lots of different things, I think there is something very specific about the Lecoq work that is really well suited in terms of environmental and social stuff right now. I would say we're having a mental health epidemic, and I've actually just did a show about that. So what the divide, it's weird. Everything, the body's inconvenient. The body is so inconvenient. If you can't disseminate it, commodify it, it's harder to get traction these days. And I'm just speaking from my own personal experience with the direction things are going in here. So yeah, trying to, that divide that you're talking about and what we need to sort of calibrate within ourselves to help. I think some of what Sarah said about being available and listening, and also Ellie, you know, that notion of disponible, just to be responsive. And I think that's what our project is about, is to say, what now? You know, what now? Because the context, I think, is different than it was 20 years ago.
So
yeah.
I'm aware that we've got two people with their hands up now. So I just wanted to keep things moving along a bit. Also aware that we're probably overrunning with the recording. But Jesty, did you have, so you have your hand up, I think. Did you want to say something?
Yes, sorry, trying to find the unmute button. Hi.
Yeah.
I've been working with this for a long time in the applied arena for the same reasons, all of you, obviously. And I was just, and also with the back and forth between what's the difference between theater and Lecoq and all of these things. And as I'm listening to you guys, it's just occurring to me that it's, for me, I think the process of learning the pedagogy and creating theater gives us such a strong spine to hold on to, that when it becomes complicated and we go into environmental and social situations, we already have the spine to lean back on from both the creation side and beginning, middle, and end, and creation in general, but also all of the steps of the pedagogy has a through line, a journey. And so I think that makes it so much easier for us to lean on that, and that joins in all of these different places. And then the other thing I just wanted to, that I really love about this work, which crosses everything, and I think is maybe the most important part, is space that's been brought up, but also the play, the le jeu, which is what's missing even in business, which is where I've been kind of leaning towards that. That's what's going to be needed in the future, like learning how to even find the excitement and play and inspiration even in the work that people are doing, and this mental illness epidemic that everyone's kind of in at the moment. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Lovely, thank you very much. Amy, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks. I was just really wanting to feed in from Jehan's remarks about why we call this Lecoq. I mean, I found myself in one of the first voyage that I was guiding this summer in Ljubljana, saying if the word Lecoq didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, because there has to be a name for what we're doing, and we have to be able to refer to it. And there's something particularly satisfying to the patriarchal vestigial mind about calling it Lecoq, I think, to be honest. But I think what we're referring to, I often think of it in terms of a difference between ethics and methods. So I think that the ethos, Jehan, you put it in your message to me, or maybe it was to the group: blank space, curiosity, investigation, long-term engagements, and I would fill in with a process or with collaborations. Then someone mentioned disponibilité, receptiveness, playfulness, Sheshti, you mentioned, and that's even sort of an ethos of humility, of self and other humility. And I think that these obviously are qualities that are cultivated by many practices, by even spiritualities, so there's a lot that you can find in the Lecoq practices that are ethically resonate with other practices. But then in terms of the methods, I would say that the methods that Lecoq put together, and I think of his methods as a sort of compendium, because he clearly drew from his sources, Coupeau and Bing being his most important precursors, and then, assembled at the school the methods of many practitioners. I mean, the clown came in, they came in, he sort of was an encyclopedist. So the methods are maybe privilege those ethical qualities, but not necessarily. I think the methods can be practiced in ways that are distinctly not like those ethical qualities. So I think that there's really kind of the two things we're working with. It's sort of, this what you are referring to, many times is sort of the privileging of a certain Sarah, you talk about, the sort of, it's enquête into the city. Wonderful, right? This is a kind of method that is obviously, so focused on like openness and service and humility and observation. And so there's the method privileges, I think, the ethos. But it doesn't, in different hands, it doesn't necessarily come across that way. It sort of is my thought that what we're talking about, the social and environmental quality of this pedagogic field is really depends on, in a sense, the intention of the practitioner. It doesn't come from the methods themselves. They can be practiced very differently. They can be practiced in a very hierarchical way. They can be practiced in a very, they can be put squarely in the black box. They can be, one can simply refuse to acknowledge that there's anything outside the black box. I mean, I think even within the school, there were examples of the black box being strictly enforced. I mean, strictly enforced. There was nothing environmental about it. So it's like, I think it's good to be sort of realistic about the fact that it can go different ways. In different hands, it can go different ways. And that we're really talking about a community interest in evolving the ethos towards and the practices towards an environmental and a social focus, is my thought. But Jehan, no, I totally think that, there are many theater practices that privilege these kinds of ethical qualities, is my 2 cents.
I think No, I think that's more than 2 cents. I think that's several dollars there. I think that sounds like a really nice sort of summarization and possibly a good place to end the recording so that we can all relax a little and